Good morning, children. Today we are going to talk about very important protozoal disease, which is malaria. So we'll deal in these headings, under these headings, like a little bit of introduction, epidemiology, etiology, pathogenesis, how the patient presents to you, what are the complications, what is the diagnosis, how do you treat it, how do you prevent it. So what is malaria? It is a protozoan disease. It is transmitted by the bite of an infected female Anopheles mosquito. Actually, it is a quite a heavy burden on tropical countries, attract to non-endemic areas, and travelers. Whoever travel to the endemic areas, they are under danger. Epidemiology, it goes like this. It is transmitted in most of the countries, 91 countries. There are approximately 1,200 deaths each day. And it has been eliminated in USA, Canada, Europe, and Russia. But in tropical countries, the prevalence is rising. So they're aiming to increase the access to accurate diagnosis effectively. Insecticides treated with bed nets are being used more so that the bites decrease, the mosquito bites decrease, and the disease spread also decreases. And we have another threat by resistance to anti-malarial drugs and insecticides. So these are the epidemiological issues we are facing right now. So what is the etiology like? What is the organism which causes this? There are 6 species. You know most of them. The Falciparum vivax, these are the two things which are seen in India. But overall, other places also, we have ovale, malaria. And the last one, newly detected, that is Knowlesi, which is a monkey malaria parasite, which is in Southeast Asia. So ovale have two species again. One is courtesy and one is Valicari. So we have 6 species in total. So the life cycle goes like this. The mosquito, once it is, it has sporozoites in its salivary glands, it bites the human body. Once the sporozoid enters the bloodstream in the human body, it goes via the bloodstream into the liver. So here in the hepatocytes, the sporozoid increases and it becomes a schizont. It gives rise to merozoites. So these merozoites, each sporozoid, it gives rise to approximately 10,000 to 30,000 merozoites. So once the cell is swollen with merozoites, it bursts open. So this schizogony is called as pre-erythrocytic schizogony. It takes about 6 to 16 days. So after this, the patient is not asymptomatic. Patient is asymptomatic during this period. The patient once there is 50 more than 50 parasites per deciliter of blood in the body, then only the patient becomes symptomatic. So here, after these merozoites burst, they go into the RBCs. They infect the RBCs. And once in the RBC, they grow with the heme. They take up the heme and they grow. They become schizonts again. And here, the gametocytes are formed. So male gametocyte and female gametocytes are also formed in the RBCs once the RBC ruptures. So these gametocytes usually, especially in Falciparum, the female gametocytes are to male ratio is 4:1. So this is called as erythrocytic schizogony. And in the RBC, it becomes trophozoid. Once it enlarges, the merozoid, once it becomes trophozoid, this trophozoid is going to infect the RBC and the RBC is destroyed. So these gametocytes, once they're bitten by the mosquito, they are taken up into the mosquito again. So in the mosquito, in the gut of the mosquito, these gametes are formed and they fertilize. And again, because of sporogony, the sporozoites are formed. So this completes the life cycle of the malarial parasite. So exoerythrocytic cycle is not seen in all the species. Only few species have these. So especially vivax and ovale. The other species, they don't have this cycle. So we don't have any relapses in these cases. I'll tell you as the slides go on. So the pathogenesis, something is like this. The merozoites get attached to the erythrocytes via a complex interaction with several erythrocyte surface receptors. Each species has some predisposition. So vivax, it usually binds to young RBCs, whereas falciparum binds to all ages of RBCs. Falciparum binds. So falciparum density will be more because it affects all the RBCs, and because of that it will be more severe. And there are some blood group antigens called as Duffy group antigens. They play a very important role in the invasion. Whoever is positive, they'll be affected by Vivax and Ovail. But these Duffy negative phenotypes, these patients, they will not be affected with Vivax and Ovail. These are seen in Africa mostly. So usually the disease in the human beings, it is caused by direct effects of the asexual parasite like RBC invasion and destruction, and also by the reaction of host. So epidemiology, malaria occurs throughout the tropical regions of the world. It is transmission is directly proportional to the density of the vector. The number of bites, square number of bites per day per mosquito, and the 10th power of the probability of the mosquito surviving for one whole day. Unless the mosquito survives, it is not going to inject any sporozoites into the body. So all this, the transmission depends on all this. So pathophysiology, so there are erythrocyte changes, and you can also have host response to these erythrocyte changes. So erythrocyte changes after invading the erythrocyte, the malarial parasite, it is progressively consumes and degrades the hemoglobin proteins, intracellular proteins, especially the hemoglobin. So this toxic heme, potentially toxic heme, it becomes the inert hemozoin. So RBC membrane is also altered, thereby it becomes more irregular in shape and more antigenic, and becomes less deformable. So once the RBC membrane is irregular and it is less deformable, it gets easily destroyed in the spleen. Falciparum infection causes cytoadherence, rosette formation, and agglutination. Cytoadherence, because of these membrane changes, all the RBCs, they come together, and there is a formation of rosette formation is there. So in the form of a flowery formation occurs, and they also agglutinate. Because of this, what happens? There is sequestration in the RBC. These RBCs, they sequester in the vital organs, and the microcirculatory flow is clogged, and thereby the metabolism is decreased of the vital organs. Especially if this happens in the brain, the microcapillaries, if they are clogged with RBCs, then there will be infarctions around that area. Maybe it can also cause, especially in falciparum, it can cause hemiparesis also, or hemiplegia. And now, how does the host respond? Removes damage from parasites initially, but once parasitic cell starts escaping the skeleton, it will rupture. So this after rupture, the by the parasitic infected cell, macrophage activation.
Roll number 35. Sai Sirisha, kindly mute the audio. Sai Sirisha.
So material released by rupture induces monocyte macrophage activation, thereby causing release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And because of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, fever and other constitutional symptoms or other pathological effects. So typically we talk about malarial fever. Malarial fever is, the patterns are quotidian, that is daily fever; tertian, that is it occurs once in every 2 days; quartan, which occurs every 3 days. So quotidian fever, that means why it occurs daily? Because of multiplication of these malarial parasites. So especially Ovail, it occurs every day, quotidian fever. Tertian, again, every once in 2 days. Quartan is malarial, Plasmodium malaria. It divides once in 72 hours. So that is called as quartan fever. So there are some genetic disorders like thalassemias, sickle cell diseases, hemoglobin C and D, hereditary ovelocytosis, G6PD deficiencies. These disorders somehow confer protection against death from falciparum malaria. They have different interactions. We just need to know this. We need not go into the details of these. So after all this, how does the patient present with? The patient usually can be asymptomatic, or the patient can come with uncomplicated malaria, or the patient can end up having complicated malaria like cerebral malaria. or the patient may go into a chronic malaria, or there can be sequelae of these malaria, like tropical splenomegaly syndrome, or there can be complications like splenic rupture, which is very rare. So we'll go one by one how the patient presents. So usually in uncomplicated malaria, the patient has non-specific symptoms, like the patient lacks a sense of well-being. The patient may complain of headache, easy fatigability, abdominal wall discomfort, or muscle aches generally. So any increased body pains, or they go more in favor of a viral disorder rather than a malarial fever. But if the patient has a fever with headache, it goes more in favor of a malarial disorder. But prominence of headache with chest pain, abdominal pain, again, cough, arthralgias, all this, they go against malaria. So usually the patient complains of small discomfort, abdominal discomfort with headache and fatigue. So headache can be very severe. Nausea, vomiting is also seen. Orthostatic hypotension is also very common. So usually there is paroxysm of fever in cases of malaria. So classic thing, it has fever spikes. Chills and rigors occur at regular intervals and are usually unusual. So, but when you take a sample, blood sample at this time, when the patient is having chills and rigors, it usually is positive for the parasite. And usually the fever is irregular initially, but the temperature it raises, especially in children and older age groups, it raises to 104 degrees Fahrenheit in conjunction with tachycardia, and sometimes the patient may also go into delirium. So malaria in children may cause febrile convulsions, but generalized convulsions are very rare with other parasites, especially falciparum malaria. You see convulsions. Falciparum malaria can cause convulsions, and this may herald the development of encephalopathy, that is cerebral malaria. So on examination, what do you see? The patient usually has mild fever, malaise. The patient can have anemia, a pallor it can be seen. Sometimes a palpable spleen is felt. Not always you can palpate the spleen, but a palpable spleen goes more in favor of a malarial disorder. The splenic enlargement is usually seen in high proportion of otherwise healthy individuals, so especially in endemic areas. If the malaria is repeatedly affecting the patient can have splenomegaly. Slight hepatomegaly is also seen, especially in young children, and jaundice can also develop in some uncomplicated cases, but usually it resolves on its own within 20 days. So there are patients coming in malaria, they also have anemia. What are the causes of anemia in malaria cases? Patients will have hemolysis of RBCs because you know the parasite is going to go and destroy the RBCs. There will be hemolysis. Spleen enlarged. This enlarged spleen also causes sequestration of RBCs. RBCs are destroyed. Dyserythropoiesis also happens, and folate deficiency also occurs because of depletion. Because all these RBCs are lysed, again it has to form more RBCs. So because of that, the folate deficiency also occurs. And last not least will be drug induced, especially you use chloroquine or primaquine, or in G6PD patients, they'll have drug induced hemolysis. So relapses, do these patients have relapses? Yes, once the acute attack subside, recurrence of fever usually does not occur in cases of falciparum malaria. But in vivax malaria, usually there can be some batches of merozoites which will be released from hepatic hypnozoites. So these hypnozoites, they can stay in the blood for in the liver for 8 to 10 years, and they cause febrile relapses after 2 to 3 months in up to 1/3 of the patients. Up to 30% of the patients can have vivax malaria relapses. So that is why we give radical therapy for these patients. Falciparum doesn't require a radical therapy. So now coming to severe malaria, about 1% of patients of falciparum malaria, they'll develop more severe manifestations. So usually, because I told you this falciparum parasite, it causes cytoadherence, rosette formation, and agglutination. Because of these, there will be circulatory blocks. So clogging of all microcapillaries in all these vital organs, they'll cause damage to all the vital organs. So here the patient may end up having severe manifestations. So Vivax usually does not cause this severe type of malaria, because parasites undergo their entire erythrocytic cycle in the circulating RBCs. So unlike Vivax RBC, which infects young RBCs, falciparum can infect any type of RBC, any aged RBC, like younger and older age RBCs. Thereby, it produces severe parasitemia. So, what are the manifestations of severe falciparum malaria? There are a lot of manifestations. We'll go one by one. So, cerebral malaria or coma. So, it is unexplained, unarousable a coma lasting for more than 30 minutes after a seizure. So, once a seizure occurs, unarousable coma, which lasts for more than 30 minutes. So this is typical for cerebral malaria. The patient may also have severe anemia. Usually the HB is less than 5 gram per deciliter. The patient may go into renal failure with urine output of less than 400 ml per 24 hours. And in spite of rehydration, the creatinine keeps raising more than 3 milligram per deciliter. The patient may also go into pulmonary edema, so where the patient goes in has acute respiratory distress. Patient has hypoxemia and respiratory failure occurs. Patient may also go into hypoglycemia with a blood glucose level of less than 40 milligram per deciliter. There can be a shock. The patient can go into shock. Circulatory collapse can occur with cold and clammy extremities. Disseminated intravascular coagulation can also occur, and there can be spontaneous bleeding through nose, mouth, or any GI tract. So the patient can also have generalized convulsions with more than 2 convulsions in the last 24 hours. So because of renal involvement, the patient can have acidosis, lactic acidosis or metabolic acidosis can occur. Hemoglobinuria can occur, especially in cases of G6PD deficiency. Jaundice can be there because there is lots of hemolysis of RBCs. There can be jaundice, and hyperparasitemia occurs in more than 5% of non-immune patients. So cerebral malaria, of all manifestations of severe malaria, cerebral malaria is the commonest, and it carries a very high mortality rate of about 25 to 30%. But this is more common in children, pregnant women, symptomized individuals, and in non-immune travelers visiting endemic areas. So any person who is non-immune, India it is endemic zone, so nothing to worry in India. But other country people who are coming from other country to India, they are at risk of developing cerebral malaria. So what are the other forms? Plasmodium ovale infection, usually it causes benign tertian malaria, unlike Vivax malaria. It tends to cease after a few paroxysms, even without treatment. Hepatic hypnozoites, like Vivax malaria, they may persist for years. So these are two species, Vivax malaria and ovale malaria, which have hepatic hypnozoites. So we need to treat these patients for relapses. Malaria infection, it causes fever within a 72-hour periodicity. That is, we call it as quartan fever. Incubation period is longest, so it is up to 18 to 40 days. Serious renal damage may occur because of progressive glomerulonephritis due to deposition of immune complexes. These deposition of immune complexes or this glomerulonephritis, it does not usually respond to antimalarial drugs or corticosteroids. So once the patient goes into serious renal damage, it is very difficult to treat the patient. So now what are the chronic complications? Cerebral malaria is an acute complication, hypoglycemia, pulmonary edema, all these are acute complications. So what is a chronic complication? One thing is hyperactive malarial sphenomegaly, which we see quite frequently in our areas. So what happens is whenever there is an endemic zone, the patient gets repeatedly infected with malaria. So this produces hypergammaglobulinemia and also causes normocytic normochromic anemia. And in certain situations, there will be splenomegaly. So especially some endemic areas in tropical Africa and Asia, they exhibit an abnormal immunological response to these repeated infections. So this happens, this leads to massive splenomegaly. There can be hepatomegaly, and there can be elevations of IgM and malarial antibodies. So, and sometimes lymphocytosis is also seen, especially in cases of Africa. So usually these patients, they are asymptomatic otherwise, but they have dull aching pain in the abdomen with a mass, abdominal mass. And occasionally they may have a sharp pain suggesting perisplenitis. And these people also will have anemia and pancytopenia. And because of splenomegaly, there will be sequestration of RBCs. RBCs are destroyed, and anemia is evident in these patients. So, but on examination of the peripheral smear, malarial parasite, you cannot see the malarial parasite. These people sometimes they are very vulnerable to respiratory and skin infections, and they may die of overwhelming infections or sepsis. So usually, any person living in endemic areas, they should receive anti-malarial chemoprophylaxis. Usually, with chemoprophylaxis, the result is good. But in non-endemic areas, anti-malarial treatment should be started in these cases. So in some cases refractory to therapy, clonal lymphoproliferation may develop and can evolve into a malignant lymphoproliferative disorder. So this is one complication which is dreaded. The other one is quartan malarial nephropathy. So in cases this doesn't occur in India, we don't have malaria infections here, but we should know. So repeated P. malaria infections, they may cause soluble immune complex injury to the renal glomeruli, resulting in nephrotic syndrome. So I've already discussed this in the other slides, but they respond poorly to antimalarial agents or glucocorticoids or cytotoxic drugs. The other one is there is some association with Burkitt's lymphoma and Epstein-Barr virus infection. So it is possible that malaria-related immune dysregulation, it may provoke an infection with the lymphoma viruses, especially Epstein-Barr virus. And Burkitt's lymphoma is more strongly associated with Epstein-Barr virus infection. Hence, there is an association seen in malarious areas of Africa where there is prevalence of Burkitt's lymphoma in children of Africa. So maybe there is a possible relation with malaria. We don't know. Now we know how the patient presents fever, generalized malaria, generalized fatigability, and the patient may also present with other complications. But how do you diagnose? Initially, way back, the first diagnostic testing was we take a thick smear and a thin smear. The thick smear species specific, thin smear genus specific. And we have faster techniques. Making thick smear and thin smear, you have to make smear, you have to staining has to be done, and then you have to look it under the microscope. Now we also have CAR tests. So what happens is monoclonal antibodies, they capture the parasitic antigens, and they are read as colored bands. So these dipsticks are available nowadays, which is a faster technique to identify. So we also have other cards like Plasmodium LDH dipstick and card test. Again, here also we'll have two colored bands will be there. Once you put a drop of blood is placed on the card, you'll have two colored bands. One band is genus specific, that is all for any malaria, any parasite, it comes as positive. And the other, if there is a second one, that means it is falciparum positive. And we have coated Buffy coat method, that is microtube concentration methods with acrid orange staining is done. Blood is collected in a specialized tube containing acrid orange and an anticoagulant and a float. So you centrifuge this tube, and this after centrifugation, the parasitized cells, they concentrate around the float. And this is again, there is a fluorescent microscope, under fluorescent microscopy, you see this concentrate. So what are the laboratory findings of these patients? What do you see? So these patients we already discussed that they'll have anemia, and the anemia is normocytic normochromic anemia. The WBC count usually is normal, but in cases of sepsis, it may go up. The acute phase reactants like ESR and C-reactive protein, they're usually elevated. Platelet count may be reduced to about 1 lakh, but in severe cases, it may go into it can reduce even further. There can be severe thrombocytopenia also. We have seen cases of malaria having platelets as less as 10,000 also in our wards. So now coming to the treatment, how do you treat these cases? So this is one thing, wherever you go in India, you need to know treatment of malaria. And even I was asked, when I went for an interview, I was asked treatment of malaria for my job. So this is mandatory. You should know. Malaria, tuberculosis, you cannot say no to. these infections, living in a country having so many infections. So for uncomplicated malaria, if at all it is chloroquine sensitive area, so you give oral chloroquine 10 milligram per kg. That is maximum of, this is base I am talking about, base drug. The base drug will be 10 milligram per kg, maximum of 600 milligrams statin. It will be followed by 5 mg, half the dose in 6 hours, and half the dose in 24 hours and 48 hours. So usually this will suffice. But for malaria and ovel, we are going to give again radical cure. So radical cure is necessary because chloroquine is only effective against it is ineffective against the hepatic form. So you have to give oral primaquine. But again, for giving primaquine, we should know that the patient is not pregnant and the patient is not having G6PD deficiency. So these two conditions, it cannot be given. Primaquine is contraindicated in pregnant ladies and G6PD deficient patients. So oral primaquine 15 milligram per day for 14 days is given to prevent relapses in vivax and oval infections. But in endemic areas, radical cure may not help that much because endemic zone, the patient may have repeated infections anyway. So reinfection is also inevitable in cases of endemic areas. Coming to Plasmodium falciparum infection, wherever there is chloroquine sensitive areas, areas are there, chloroquine is the best drug. So same drug, same dose, 10 milligram per kg stat, and half the dose, 5 milligram per kg for at 6 hours, 24 hours, and 48 hours. So if this is not there, then if it is not sensitive, you can go for artesunate 4 milligram per kg OD for 3 days plus sulfadoxine 25 milligram per kg and pyrimethamine 1.25 milligram per kg as a single dose. So artesunate has to be given for 3 days and sulfadoxine pyrimethamine combination has to be given as a single dose. Or you can also give artesunate plus amodiaquine at the dose of 10 milligram per kg base OD for 3 days again. So artesunate and amodiaquine both for 3 days. So this is the treatment for normal falciparum infection, not for the severe one. So if at all there is a multi-drug resistant falciparum malaria, so the patient is resistant to chloroquine, so then what? So you can either give artemether lumefantrine combination with the food for 3 days, or you can give artesunate plus chloroquine for 3 days, or you can also give dihydroartemisinin piperacin for 3 days. Now, we also have something called as add-on therapy for falciparum patients. So we give either artesunate or quinine. So quinine, we used to give quinine not when I was a student. Quinine is the drug of choice for falciparum malaria. But because of side effects, because of QT prolongation and other side effects, acute hypoglycemia and all, we have a better drug at artesunate, so we are giving artesunate these days. So it is either artesunate 2 milligram per kg for 7 days or quinine 10 mg of salt per kg TID for 7 days plus one of the following, either tetracycline, doxycycline or clindamycin. Tetracycline is almost not available these days, so doxycycline is available at a dose of 3 milligram per kg OD for 7 days. We can also use clindamycin. Doxy is a cheaper one. Clindamycin is a bit costlier. So clindamycin 10 mg per kg BID for 7 days. Or we can also go with atovaquone and proguanil combination for 3 days with food. So now coming to severe falciparum malaria, these are the patients which are getting admitted in our wards. So we need to give IV injections. So artesunate 2.4 milligram per kg stat followed by 2.4 milligram per kg at 12 and 24 hours and daily till whenever it is necessary. So almost we give it for 5 days after that. So if this is unavailable, it is not available, artesunate is not available, then you can go with artemether 3.2 milligram per kg stat IM followed by 1.6 milligram per kg OD. Or if this is not available, you can go with quinine dihydrochloride. That is, usually you give a bolus dose, that is 20 milligram per kg infused over 4 hours. Then again it is followed by 10 milligram per kg TID for next 1 week. So this can be used if artemether is not available. But people whoever is on quinidine, they have to be monitored with ECG. electrocardiographic monitoring has to be done for these people, right? So what are the supportive therapies which these patients require? You need to give whenever there is dehydration, you need to give IV fluids. If at all there is a hypoglycemia, you have to give 25% dextrose. If the patient is having severe anemia, then you have to give blood transfusions also. In cases of metabolic acidosis, you can go with sodium bicarbonate. Whenever bicarbonate values are less than 7 in ABG, you have to do an ABG analysis. Whenever there is bicarbonate less than 7, you need to correct that. Phenytoin and phenobarbital for seizures if patient is anti-epileptics. If at all there is any raised intracranial tension, you have to give mannitol. But mannitol is again contraindicated in falciparum malaria because mannitol is going to decrease the pressure. Already in falciparum patients, usually what happens is the blood viscosity is high. So if you give mannitol on top of that, the patient is going to go into irreparable damage. There can be micro agglutinations or micro thrombi can form, and the patient may end up having hemiplegia or hemiparesis. So we need to be careful in falciparum cases. So in patients with more than 10% parasitemia, exchange transfusion has been tried, but how effective it is, we are yet to know. So how do you prevent these diseases? So you all know because it is a mosquito bite which causes the disease. You have to avoid mosquito bites, wear long dresses, long sleeve dresses and trousers. So you can also use insect treated bed nets. So repellent creams or sprays can be used. Apart from this, there is a vaccine which is under trial, not yet come out. But once it comes out, maybe it will be more useful than all these other methods to eradicate the disease. There are people who travel from from non-endemic zones. They travel to endemic areas. What should these people do? So there is chemoprophylaxis. Lots of drugs are available. They need to take 1 to 2 days prior to the travel. They need to take these drugs, and after coming back, either up to 1 week or up to 4 weeks, depending on the drug, they need to take the drugs till they are in these endemic areas. So the drugs available are atovaquone and proguanil combination. So one tablet OD for 7 days after leaving the area. He has to take every day, 1 to 2 days before he has to start it, and then he has to take every day, usually at the same time. If it is taken at the same time, it is more effective. So the patient, if the patient takes at 9 o'clock in the morning, let them take at the same time at 9 o'clock in the morning every day till 7 days after leaving such areas. We can also use chloroquine phosphate, 300 milligrams base, weekly once. This is weekly once drug till 4 weeks after leaving. Doxycycline, 100 milligram daily. Doxycycline has to be taken daily till 4 weeks after leaving the place. So hydroxychloroquine sulfate, in case the patient is not able to take chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine sulfate is an alternative. It is 300 milligrams base. The tablet comes as 400 mg tablet. The patient has to take till 4 weeks after leaving the area. The next one is mefloquine, 228 milligrams of base. The tablet is 250 milligram tablet. The patient has to take till 4 weeks after leaving the area. And last is primaquine. Again, primaquine cannot be given in pregnant ladies and G6PD deficient patients. So this has to be taken 30 milligrams daily till 7 days after leaving the area.